The Arizona Territory of 1874 was a land carved by heat, blood, and defiance. Out there, the earth burned red beneath a sun that seemed older than time, and the wind carried tales of men who disappeared between canyons without leaving so much as a shadow behind. Every mile of desert was haunted, not by ghosts but by the memory of those who had tried to tame it and failed. The town of Dos Rios stood stubbornly in that wasteland like a splinter in the hide of the wilderness. Built on the edge of Apache lands, it was more dust than wood, more whiskey than water. Its streets were lined with weathered faces and sun-bleached dreams, the kind of place where every man carried a gun and every woman carried secrets. They said the territory was ruled by no law except the one carried by a man's hand. But there was one name that even the gunmen whispered with caution: Taza, the Apache who ruled the mesas to the south. To settlers, he was a savage who struck from nowhere, vanishing into the stone like smoke. To his people, he was the son of the mountain spirits, a war chief chosen by the wind itself. The soldiers from Fort Lowell had hunted him for years, but the desert seemed to fight for him, and into this world rode Evelyn Hart, a woman who did not belong to the frontier, yet seemed carved for it all the same. She was 23, daughter of Colonel Nathaniel Hart, a Union veteran who had traded his commission for land and the promise of peace. Evelyn had been raised back east, in the cool civility of Boston, all white gloves and polished speech, until her father summoned her west to help with the trading post he ran for both settlers and local tribes. Most women would have balked at the idea of living among dust storms and danger, but Evelyn wasn't most women. The genteel world had bored her. The endless talk of suitors and soirees, the dull safety of city life. She wanted to feel the world, to see the kind of beauty and savagery the West offered in equal measure. Her father, gruff and weather-beaten, warned her of the dangers beyond the creek. "There's a reason we build fences, Evie," he told her one morning as she saddled the mare. "And there's a reason I keep crossing them," she shot back, half smiling. It wasn't that she didn't believe in danger, it was that she believed in herself more. The morning she saw him, the desert was strangely still. She had ridden past the San Pedro River, the mare's hooves kicking up clouds of gold dust that shimmered in the sunlight. The horizon was a shimmering mirage, endless and alive. She dismounted to rest, running her fingers through the hot sand. When she felt it, that prickle of instinct that told her she was being watched, she turned and saw him, high on a ridge. Half silhouetted by the sun, sat a rider astride a painted stallion. The wind caught his hair, black as raven feathers, and his eyes were fixed on her with a stillness that froze her heart mid-beat. He didn't move, didn't speak. The air between them tightened like a bowstring. It was not the look of a man seeing a stranger. It was the look of a predator who had found something he'd already claimed. Evelyn couldn't say how long they stared. A moment, a lifetime, she never knew. But in that instant the world narrowed to just the two of them. The white woman who didn't know her place and the Apache who ruled the land beneath her feet. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he turned his horse and vanished into the canyon's red throat. For a long time she stood there, unable to breathe, her pulse hammering like a drum. Something deep and ancient stirred in her chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something else. Something she didn't yet dare to name. When she returned to town, the post was abuzz with rumors. A cavalry patrol had been found dead 2 days south, and the Apache were restless again. Men in the saloon cursed Taza's name, calling for blood, while others spoke quieter, with respect. "A man like that," one said, "you don't hunt, you survive him." That night, while lanterns burned low and cicadas screamed outside her window, Evelyn found herself replaying that moment in the desert. His eyes, so fierce yet not cruel. The way he looked at her, as though he'd known her from a dream. The next morning, she found a single black feather wedged in the doorframe of the trading post. Her father saw it and went pale. "Apache warning," he muttered. "Means we've been seen. You don't cross that creek again, you hear me?" But it wasn't a warning to Evelyn. She felt it somehow. It was a message, a promise. Days passed, and she tried to push it from her mind. But when she rode again, she caught glimpses of movement in the hills, a horseman far off watching her from the shadows. Sometimes he'd disappear before she could be sure he was even real, yet she always knew. He was there. Her father's business brought Apaches often, men and women who traded hides for tools, silver for bullets, or food for salt. Evelyn treated them with kindness, learning their words, earning shy smiles from the children, and wary nods from the elders. But one afternoon a hush fell as a small band entered the post, proud men in war paint and eagle feathers, and among them, him. Her breath caught as the tall figure stepped into the lamplight. The room seemed to still. His gaze met hers, and though neither spoke, the silence between them said more than words could. She didn't even realize she was trembling until he looked away. Her father didn't notice, but the old Apache woman beside the counter did. She murmured something in her tongue and smiled faintly as if she knew. When Taza and his men left, Evelyn followed them outside, her heart thundering. She wanted to speak, to say something, but when he turned and met her eyes, all thought fled. The world went still again. He said nothing, only inclined his head once in silent recognition, before mounting his horse and riding off into the sunset. And in that golden light, she understood something terrible and thrilling. She had been seen, truly seen, by a man who ruled this wild land in a way no law or soldier ever could. That night, the wind rose across the plains, rattling shutters and howling through the canyons. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching the moonlight spill over the desert, and whispered softly to the darkness, "Who are you?" But she already knew the answer. The frontier was not a place for soft hearts or easy lives. Yet somehow she sensed her fate had already been decided. Not by God, not by man, but by the desert itself. And the desert had chosen to bind her to the Apache with the burning eyes. The woman who defied boundaries had crossed one that could never be uncrossed. And somewhere beyond the hills, under 1,000 stars, the Apache chief stared into the same sky, knowing that the white woman with the fire spirit gaze would change everything. For her, for him, and for a land soaked in both blood and longing. The mesas rose like red stone cathedrals against the morning sky, their faces carved by wind and time. To most who rode through that country, they were lifeless monuments. But to the Apache, they were sacred, each canyon a heartbeat, each shadow a memory of ancestors who had walked the earth before the white man ever dreamed of crossing it. High above those winding canyons lived Taza, son of Chief Naiche, heir to a bloodline of warriors and spirit keepers. To his people he was more than a man. He was Doti, the hawk of vengeance, born under a storm that split the sky and marked him as chosen. His name alone carried the weight of both protection and fury. When Taza was a boy, soldiers came to their village in the night. His brother, Chato, fell with a bullet through his chest, and their mother was taken away in chains. From that day forward, Taza swore his life to the mountains and to the vengeance of his tribe. He learned the songs of the wind and the secrets of the hunt. He could track a man through stone and make himself disappear in sand. By the time he reached manhood, his legend was already spreading. The Apache who ruled the Red Mesa, who could strike from nowhere and vanish like smoke. Yet there was a cost to legend. Power left no room for peace. In his camp, where the fires burned low and drums echoed through the canyon walls, Taza sat apart from his people, a figure carved of obsidian and silence. His warriors laughed and shared stories of raids and hunts, but their chief's eyes always searched the horizon, for danger, for meaning, for the ghosts that would not rest. It was during one such night that a scout approached, kneeling before him. "A white woman crossed the San Pedro alone," the scout said in their tongue. "She rode into the Canyon of Spirits." Taza's eyes narrowed. No one rode there, not traders, not soldiers, not even fools. The canyon belonged to the gods, and to trespass there was to tempt fate. "Why do you bring me tales of a woman?" he asked quietly. The scout hesitated. "Because she did not run when she saw me. She looked at me as if she feared nothing." That alone was enough to stir Taza's curiosity. Among his people, courage was sacred. Among his enemies, it was rare. The next dawn, he saddled his painted horse and rode toward the canyon. The desert shimmered with heat. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust. And then he saw her. Pale skin, hair the color of wheat, standing beside a chestnut mare. She looked too delicate for such a world, yet she moved with purpose, scanning the horizon like someone who belonged to it. When her eyes lifted to meet his, Taza felt the strangest jolt, not of anger but recognition. In the Apache tongue there was a word for it. Shido Nijoni, meaning the one who mirrors the soul. She did not speak, nor did he. but the space between them thrummed with something ancient. That night, back among his people, he sat before the fire and thought of her. He tried to push the image from his mind, the courage in her eyes, the defiance in her stance. To desire a white woman was death. To even think of her was betrayal. But the heart, like the desert wind, obeyed no law. Days later, when his men brought goods to trade at the Heart trading post, Taza went with them. He told himself it was only to see what the settlers plotted. But when he entered that wooden building and saw her again, standing behind the counter with sleeves rolled and eyes sharp as a hawk's, he knew the truth. She was not like other settlers. She did not shrink at the sight of his war paint. She looked at him with curiosity, not disgust. The air between them seemed to still as she passed him a bundle of cloth. Their fingers brushed, a brief electric spark, and though neither moved, something had shifted forever. Her father greeted the Apache in broken Spanish, oblivious to the silent war waged in glances across the counter. When Taza left, he paused at the doorway, turning back once. "Evelyn," he said softly, tasting her name as if testing its weight. Her breath caught. He spoke her name perfectly, without hesitation. No man had ever said her name like that, as if claiming it. After that day, the world seemed to conspire against reason. Evelyn saw him in her dreams. His face lit by firelight, his voice a whisper of wind through canyons. And in the wilderness far from town, she sometimes glimpsed his figure on the ridges, watching silently. She told herself it was imagination. But deep down she knew the truth. The desert itself was drawing them together. For Taza, the struggle was a storm inside. The elders warned him that the white man's world would destroy anything it touched. "They come with words of peace," his uncle said, "but their peace is made with iron." Yet when Taza closed his eyes, all he saw was the woman's gaze, unyielding, fearless, alive. When a messenger from the north brought news of soldiers burning an Apache camp, Taza gathered his warriors for vengeance. But before the attack, he found himself riding toward the river, toward the place where he had first seen her. She was there again, sketching in a small book, her mare grazing nearby. She looked up as he approached, her eyes steady. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "This is my land," he answered. "Then it's a land big enough for both of us," she replied. He dismounted, slow and deliberate, watching her every movement. "You are not afraid. Should I be?" He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. "Fear keeps you alive," he murmured. "Then maybe I'm already dead," she said, half smiling. Something inside him cracked. A soundless thing. Like the earth splitting after rain. They spoke little after that. He left her with a look that burned hotter than the noonday sun, a look that said more than words ever could. That night, as the moon rose over the mesa, the wind carried whispers through the Apache camp. The chief was changing. The hawk who once knew only vengeance now looked toward the horizon, toward the white star that had entered his sky. To his people, it was both omen and warning. The medicine man told him dreams of fire and rivers of blood. "Two worlds cannot share one heart," he warned. "If you take her into yours, one world will burn." Taza listened, but his eyes remained fixed on the stars. He had seen courage in a woman no one expected it from, and he could not forget her. In the weeks that followed, he sent word through the traders in a simple token, a carved stone shaped like a hawk's feather. When Evelyn found it among the goods at her counter, she knew at once who had sent it. Her father called it trinket nonsense, but she held it as if it were alive. From that day forward, every time she rode out past the creek, the wind seemed to whisper his name. And somewhere beyond sight, on the edge of the red mesa, the Apache chief watched her ride, torn between the law of his people and the pull of a fate written long before either of them was born. He told himself she was a distraction, that he would forget her. But the desert remembers everything, and it had already chosen its story. The desert had its own kind of silence, not the gentle quiet of peace, but the sharp stillness before a gunshot. It was in that silence the Arizona Territory waited, brittle and ready to break. The fragile truce between settlers and Apache had held by threads woven of trade and necessity. Colonel Hart's trading post sat like a bridge across a canyon, its planks groaning under the weight of suspicion. Every handshake was a gamble, every smile a mask. When word came that a wagon train had been found burned near the foothills, 15 settlers dead, wagons blackened to ash, the wind shifted. The U.S. cavalry blamed the Apache immediately. Men in Dos Rios spat the name Taza like a curse. They said the savage chief had finally shown his true nature. Evelyn Hart knew better. She had seen the truth in his eyes. Fierce, yes, but not cruel. Still, she felt the walls closing around her. Her father forbade her to speak of the Apache, to even mention the Red Mesa. But Evelyn had always been a creature of defiance, so, when dusk painted the sky in the color of blood, she saddled her mare and rode into the canyon alone. The soldiers called it foolishness. The townsfolk called it madness. But the desert understood. Some things can't be left to die behind closed doors. She rode hard, dust swirling around her like ghosts. By the time she reached the foothills, the moon was climbing the eastern sky, silvering the rock walls. She didn't need a guide. Her heart pulled her where her mind dared not go. And then she saw him. Taza stepped out from the shadows like he had risen from the earth itself. The torchlight from her saddle lantern flickered against his face, painted in streaks of red and black, eyes glowing in the half-dark. "Why do you come here?" he asked, his voice deep, slow, carrying the rhythm of thunder far off in the mountains. "Because they say you did it," she answered. "That you burned those wagons. That you killed those people." His jaw tightened. "You believe them?" She met his gaze. "I don't know what to believe, but I had to hear it from you." He stepped closer, the sound of his boots soft in the sand. "The ones who died were traitors. They carried rifles hidden under flour sacks. They were sent to kill my people." The way he said it, steady, cold, without plea, made her believe him. "But why not tell the soldiers?" she pressed. "Why not explain?" "Because they do not want truth," he said. "They want war." The canyon wind rushed between them, tugging at her hair. His hand rose instinctively, not to touch but to stop a strand from catching on her face. For a heartbeat, their fingers hovered, and in that stillness something greater than words passed between them. For the first time, she saw the man beyond the legend, the leader burdened by the weight of his people, the son haunted by blood on both sides. "You should go," he said finally. "They will come for me soon. If they find you here, they will call you traitor." She didn't move. "I can't let them hang you for something you didn't do." A flicker of something, pain, maybe admiration, crossed his features. "Then you will burn with me." But she stayed. That night they spoke until the stars burned low. He told her of the Red Mesa's spirits, of the old songs that said love and death walked hand in hand. She told him of her mother, who had died back east before ever seeing the frontier. He listened, silent, as if memorizing the cadence of her voice. When dawn broke, the desert stretched between them like a promise and a curse. She returned to town, her heart a storm. She spoke to the soldiers, begged them to wait to seek proof before spilling blood. But soldiers in the frontier didn't trade in proof. They traded in vengeance. That night, Fort Lowell's bugle cried out across the valley. The war drums answered from the hills. The hunt for Taza began. Evelyn tried to warn him. She rode to the mesa again, this time with the smell of smoke in the air and the echo of gunfire rolling across the plains. But when she reached the canyon, she found blood in the sand, and Taza wounded half-conscious near the riverbank. He had been ambushed, shot through the shoulder. His horse lay dead nearby. "Evelyn?" His voice was raw, his breath shallow. "Why did you come?" "To save you," she said, already tearing fabric from her dress to stop the bleeding. He laughed bitterly. "You save me, they kill you." "Then we'll run," she said, her hands trembling but determined. "Both of us." She hid him in the cellar beneath her father's post, behind barrels of grain and crates of tools. For 3 nights she nursed him, cleaning the wound, feeding him, keeping watch while her father slept unaware above them. Each night, as the wind howled through the cracks, he told her stories of the desert, of coyotes who sang to the moon, of lovers who became stars. His English was rough, but his words carried a poetry that made her heart ache. One night, when fever took him, he murmured in Apache, her name tangled among words she didn't understand. She bent close, whispering, "I'm here." He opened his eyes, dark and fevered, and for a moment she thought he didn't see her at all, but someone older, someone long gone. Then he reached up, fingers brushing her cheek, and said in English, "You shouldn't have come." She caught his hand, pressing it against her face. I couldn't stay away. The fever broke by morning, but the soldiers were closing in. They searched every shack, every canyon, every shadow. The sound of hooves thundered like judgment. Her father discovered the truth first. The blood on her hands, the food gone missing, the strange silence from the cellar. When he opened that door and found the Apache chief lying there, he froze. "Good God," he whispered. Evelyn stepped between them. "He's innocent, Father. Please, if you tell them, they'll hang him." Her father's face was gray with horror and betrayal. "You've doomed us all," he said quietly. That night, under cover of darkness, she smuggled Taza out through the back, down by the river. The moonlight traced silver lines on his skin as he mounted a borrowed horse, still weak but alive. "You can't stay," she said. "They'll never stop hunting you." "And you?" he asked, looking down at her. "I'll make them listen," she said. "I'll make them see who you are." He smiled faintly, sorrow in his eyes. "They will never see." "Only you do." He leaned down then, just close enough that his breath brushed her hair. "One day, when the wind calls your name, follow it. I will be there." Then he turned his horse and disappeared into the darkness, leaving only hoofprints and silence behind. When the soldiers came to the post the next morning, they found nothing. The cellar was empty, save for the faint scent of smoke and sage. Evelyn told them he had died of his wounds and drifted downriver. It was a lie, she told, with tears still wet on her cheeks. But in her heart, she knew the truth. He was alive, somewhere in the red canyons, waiting for the storm to pass. And though she didn't know it then, that storm was only beginning. The desert has a way of remembering secrets. You can bury them under dust or drown them in whiskey. But when the wind shifts, it brings everything back. For weeks after she saved him, Evelyn lived as if between two worlds. The trading post stood quiet under the wide Arizona sky, yet beneath its worn floorboards she could still hear the echo of his voice, the low rumble, the whispered stories of stars and spirits. Every time the wind swept through the mesquite trees, she thought she heard him call her name. Her father had changed since that night. His shoulders, once straight as a rifle barrel, now bent under the weight of anger and confusion. He'd lost faith, not just in his daughter, but in the fragile peace he'd spent years trying to build. He no longer spoke to the Apache traders, nor to the soldiers who demanded information. He simply sat behind the counter, eyes hollow, as if the war had finally come home. Evelyn tried to mend what she could, selling flour, stitching blankets, pretending not to see the wanted posters tacked to every wall. Wanted, Taza of the Red Mesa, dead or alive. Reward, $500. She tore one down when no one was looking, folding it into her pocket. The paper smelled of dust and iron and grief, but Taza was alive. She knew it. Every morning she'd ride past the creek, searching the horizon for movement. Sometimes she saw a hawk circling the mesa, and she'd whisper, "I'm still here." It was foolish, perhaps. But love in the West was always a kind of madness, a fire you fed even when it burned you. Then one evening, as twilight bled over the hills, she found him again. He stepped out from behind the rocks like the desert had given him back. His arm was still bound where the bullet had passed through, but his stance was strong, the proud, silent strength of a man who owed nothing to the world. For a long moment, they said nothing. The air was thick with dust and longing. "I thought you were gone," she breathed. "I was," he said simply. "Now I am not." A faint smile touched his lips. For the first time, she saw softness in him, not weakness, but a kind of weary peace. He reached into his satchel and handed her something wrapped in deerskin. She opened it carefully. Inside was a silver pendant and a small hand-carved hawk. "It is yours," he said. "It will keep the wind with you." Her fingers trembled as she closed it in her palm. "Taza," she whispered. "If they find you, they will not," he said. "Not if you stay away," but she didn't stay away. She couldn't. From then on, they met in secret, in the canyon where the water whispered over stone, where cactus flowers bloomed even in drought. She brought him food, medicine, and words from the outside world. In return, he gave her the stories of his people, their songs and their ghosts. In the soft light of those evenings, their worlds blurred. She was no longer the trader's daughter, and he was no longer the outlaw chief. They were just two souls carved out of the same stubborn earth. He taught her to ride without fear, to listen for the pulse beneath the wind. She taught him to read. Small words at first, traced in the dirt with a stick. "Love," she wrote one night, the letters crooked in the sand. He looked at them a long time before speaking. "In my tongue we have no word for that," he said. "Only for the spirit that binds two hearts." "And what is it called?" she asked softly. "Kosa." She repeated it, the sound strange on her lips, yet it felt like prayer. But the world beyond their canyon was changing fast. The soldiers were restless. The settlers angry. A rumor spread through the territory that the Apache were preparing for war again, that the Red Mesa chief was gathering his warriors for a final stand. When the army arrived at Dos Rios, the air turned to steel. Colonel Samuel Rains, her father's old comrade from the war, led them, a man who believed mercy was weakness and vengeance was justice. He rode in with 50 men, their boots pounding the ground like drums of doom. Rains greeted Colonel Hart with cold courtesy. "We've tracked the Apache ghost to these hills," he said. "You wouldn't be hiding him, would you, old friend?" Her father, weary and broken, could only shake his head. "If I were," he said quietly, "it's because the law out here don't know the meaning of right and wrong anymore." That night, Evelyn overheard the soldiers' plan. They would torch the mesa at dawn, burn out anything that moved, man or beast. Her blood ran cold. Before the first light touched the sand, she saddled her horse and rode hard into the canyon. The wind screamed her name, but she didn't stop. Taza was waiting as if he had known she would come. "They are coming," she gasped. "You have to run." He shook his head. "I will not leave my land. If they burn it, they burn me with it. Then I'll stay with you." She cried, "No." His voice was sharp, fierce, but his eyes were breaking. "You must live. You are not meant to die in this fire." Before she could answer, the thunder of hooves echoed through the canyon. Soldiers appeared on the ridges, rifles glinting. The first gunshot split the air. Taza seized her arm and pulled her behind the rocks. Bullets tore through the cactus, kicking up dust and stone. The sound was deafening. "We can't fight them all," she shouted. He looked at her, and in that gaze she saw everything. Love, fury, surrender. "I told you once," he said, voice low against the chaos. "Fear keeps you alive. But love makes life worth dying for." Before she could reply, he pushed her toward her horse. "Go," but she didn't go. She turned back just as the soldiers reached the lower canyon. Her father was among them, shouting orders, rifle raised. Then came the shot. It wasn't aimed at her, but at Taza. He moved to shield her, but the bullet found another target. Her father staggered back, struck through the chest. "Father!" Evelyn screamed, running toward him. Taza caught her as she fell to her knees beside the dying man. Colonel Hart's eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion and sorrow. His blood soaked her hands. "Evie," he gasped, "I only wanted to keep you safe." And then he was gone. The world went red. Flames spread from the gunfire, catching the dry brush. The canyon roared with smoke and screams. Taza lifted her into the saddle. "We must go," he shouted. Together they rode through the inferno, the sky raining embers, the river glowing with reflected fire. The soldiers' shouts faded behind them as they vanished into the maze of rocks and shadows. By dawn, the trading post was ash, the flagpole charred, the town silent. The white men said the Apache took the colonel's daughter that night, dragged her into the wilds. Others said she went willingly, following the man who had stolen her heart. But those who lived long enough to tell the tale swore they saw them once more. Far on the horizon, two riders silhouetted against the rising sun, bound together by flame and fate. And in the desert wind that swept through the burned canyon, the ashes whispered their names. The desert forgets nothing. It buries bones, swallows towns, and erases roads, yet somehow it remembers love. Weeks passed since the fire in the canyon. The army had pulled back, leaving nothing but ash and silence. The wind whistled through the charred remains of Dos Rios, carrying the scent of smoke and sorrow. Travelers who passed through said they'd seen two sets of tracks heading west, one horse, one mare, both riding deep into Apache country. Evelyn Hart had vanished from the world of white men. Some said she'd been taken. Others said she'd lost her mind. But the truth lay far beyond their reach. Deep within the blood-colored mesas where the land itself spoke in whispers, Taza had brought her to the high country, where the rivers ran cold and the stars seemed close enough to touch. His people, scattered and hunted, gathered again in secret camps among the cliffs. They watched her with silent, measuring eyes. To them, she was the daughter of the enemy, pale, fragile, wrapped in sorrow. But when she tended the wounded and shared her meager food, they began to soften. She learned their words, their songs, their silences. She sewed their torn moccasins, listened to the old women's stories, and sat by the fire each night as the wind sang through the canyon. Taza watched her with a quiet awe he could not name. She had lost everything, her father, her home, her world, yet she stood tall, like a tree that refused to bend to the storm. One night, beneath a blood-red moon, she asked him, "What will become of us, Taza?" He looked toward the horizon, where the plains shimmered like molten glass. "We live until the land forgets us," he said. "Then we become part of the dust." She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "And love?" He met her eyes. "Love," he said softly, "is the only thing the desert cannot bury." That night they stood together in the stillness, the firelight painting their faces gold. For the first time, there were no words between them, only the pulse of their hearts and the slow rhythm of the wind. The months that followed were cruel. The army's patrols swept through the valleys, searching for any sign of Apache camps. Hunger stalked the tribe. Their horses grew thin, their fires small. But Taza's resolve was iron. He would not surrender his people, or her. Rumors reached them of new treaties, new betrayals. The white generals called for peace even as they built new forts. The old chiefs spoke of prophecy, of a warrior who would unite the last of their kind. Many looked to Taza. He had become a symbol, a shadow that haunted the borders. Evelyn knew what it meant. The more they spoke his name, the closer death drew. One evening, while gathering water from the spring, she heard voices down the valley. Soldiers, moving in silence. Her heart froze. She ran back to the camp. "Taza, they found us!" The tribe moved fast, packing what little they owned. But there was no time. The mountains trapped them. Sheer walls of red rock on one side, rifles on the other. Taza stood in the center of the canyon, his bow in one hand, his pistol in the other. The men gathered behind him, ready to fight. Evelyn grabbed his arm. "There's no way out," she cried. "There is always a way," he said. But this time she knew he meant something more than escape. The soldiers advanced, blue coats glinting in the sun, rifles raised. Their leader called out, "Taza of the Red Mesa, surrender and your people will be spared." Taza's voice rang out like thunder. "You cannot spare what you never gave. This land was ours before your flags touched it. We bow to no man." The first shot came from the cliffs. It struck the ground near Evelyn's feet, sending up a burst of dust. Chaos erupted, screams, smoke, gunfire echoing off the rocks. Evelyn fell to the ground, covering her head. The air filled with the bitter scent of gunpowder. She saw Taza firing from behind a boulder, his movements calm, precise. He was everywhere at once, a ghost in the dust. Then came the second shot. It hit him high in the shoulder, spinning him backward. She ran to him, heedless of the bullets. "Taza!" she cried, pressing her hands to the wound. He gritted his teeth, blood darkening his tunic. "You must go." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. "Not again." He tried to stand, but the strength drained from him like sand from a broken hourglass. Around them the fighting raged. The Apaches were being pushed back, their line breaking. Evelyn looked to the cliffs. There was only one path, a narrow ridge that led to the open desert beyond. She half-dragged, half-carried him toward it. The soldiers saw them, shouted when one fired. Bullets hissed past like angry hornets. She stumbled but didn't stop. Her breath came ragged, her heart pounding like a drum. When they reached the top, she turned. Below them, smoke curled through the canyon like a dying serpent. Taza leaned against her, his face pale. "The land remembers," he murmured. "Even if we fall, the wind will carry our names." "Then let it," she whispered. "Let it carry us both." They rode west into the sunset, not running but claiming what was left of freedom. Behind them, the soldiers' shouts faded into nothing. Ahead lay only horizon, endless, empty, waiting. For 3 days they rode until the desert turned to salt and the stars became their only fire. When his strength finally failed, they stopped beside a dry riverbed. Evelyn knelt beside him, tears tracing the dust on her cheeks. Don't leave me, she whispered. He smiled faintly. The desert does not take what belongs to it, he said. It only keeps what it loves. And then with the last of his breath, he spoke the word he had taught her, Kosa. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering it back through her tears. When dawn came, the wind rose over the riverbed, lifting the dust in soft spirals. She buried him beneath a circle of stones facing east, where the sun was reborn each morning. No one saw her after that. Some say she wandered the mesas alone, wearing the silver hawk he'd given her. Others swear she became a spirit of the desert, a pale figure who walks the ridges at dusk, guarding the place where love met fire. And when the wind howls through the canyons of Arizona, the old ones still tell the tale of the woman who defied the Apache who ruled the territory, and how he claimed her, not with chains or force, but with a single glance that burned forever in her soul. The land remembers them still. Their names are written not in books, but in the dust and the wind, in every whisper of the red horizon where love and death ride side by side.